I never believed the sky could speak. I spent much of my life measuring its voices with numbers, satellites, and graphs, searching in it only for laws, not meanings. My name is Daniel Moore. I am 60 years old, and for 14 years I have carried within me the roar of a wave that never stops crashing. It was 2011 when the hurricane that struck our coast took away Evelyn, my wife, my rock, my only reason to stay on the shore. Since then, every storm has become an enemy for me to understand, a beast to keep at bay with science, with control, with logic. But the truth is, since that day, I have only looked for a way to feel less guilty for having survived. My house is a silent observatory overlooking the ocean. Every wall is covered with weather maps, instruments, and forecasting models that update in real time. I sleep little, and when I do, I dream of water. Cold, dark, alive. That water which stole everything from me and which still seems to want to give me back something I don't understand. In recent years, I have transformed into what they call a scholar of catastrophic events. But in reality, I am just a man who has never stopped searching for meaning and pain. When I first read the name Melissa on the radar system, I didn't feel the usual professional thrill. I felt fear. Not because it was a particularly powerful storm, not yet at least, but because I sensed something human in that vortex. Every time the satellite updated the image, it seemed as if the spiral was drawing closer to my heart, as if it were breathing with me. Its winds began to take shape in the words of the news reports, and my mind calculated trajectories, pressures, movements. But my spirit knew that this time it wasn't just about meteorology. I spent 2 nights without sleep, staring at the screens as the currents intensified. I had the feeling that someone was watching me through those maps, as if there was a gaze behind the colored lines. I remember the room feeling colder, and the hum of the computers becoming more distant. I tried to grab another coffee, but the cup trembled in my hands. A dull ache shot through my chest, and in an instant, the entire laboratory seemed to tilt, as if the earth had given way beneath me. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The last sound I remember was the wind whistling outside the window, the same sound that had accompanied my life 14 years before. I thought I heard Evelyn's voice calling me again, sweet, distant, and then everything vanished. No light, no darkness, just a perfect silence as if the world had stopped breathing. Then a presence, a current that was not air but living force, slowly lifted me. There was no more weight, no fear, no time. Below me, the ocean stretched out like a sheet of gleaming glass, and I understood that I was not falling. I was rising. My mind tried to name what was happening, but there was no language for that peace. It was not a dream. It was not a delusion. It was the beginning of something that science had never predicted. While my body remained stretched out somewhere in that room, my spirit crossed an invisible boundary. Everything I had believed I knew about life, about the sky, about matter, began to dissolve like mist under the sun. And just then, suspended between 2 worlds, a light began to envelop me. It was not blinding nor warm, but alive. It drew me upward, and in that call, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of home. It was there that I understood that my storm was about to truly begin. When I reopened my eyes, I no longer heard the noise of the monitors, nor the wind beating against the windows of my house in Florida. There were no walls, no sky, no earth, only an immense light that breathed like a living being. Yet it did not blind me nor burn me. It wrapped around me with the same gentleness with which a mother holds a child who has stopped fighting. Beneath me stretched a sea that was not a sea, an ocean of liquid, transparent glass, through which flowed something akin to a divine memory. Every wave seemed to move to the rhythm of a breath, and in its movement I saw colors that do not exist on earth. I felt small, naked, yet I felt no fear. It was as if every particle of my being recognized that place and said, "Here you are, you've returned." Then I heard the voice. It did not come from outside, but from within and above and all around. "Daniel." That single sound was enough to break the silence of eternity. I turned, and what I saw I can never fully describe. Before me stood Jesus, not as an icon, not as a church memory, but real. He had a human face, gentle features, eyes that contained centuries of love and pain, yet he emanated a light that did not come from any direction, because he himself was the direction of all light. His gaze pierced through me, and in an instant I saw my entire life reflected in him. Evelyn's face, my anger, the nights I had cried out to a sky I believed was empty. I fell to my knees. The words exploded from my chest. Why have you brought me here? Am I about to die? Jesus did not answer immediately. He leaned down slightly and his face came close to mine, as if he wanted me to feel his breath. Then he spoke, and his voice had the sound of the sea and the wind together. You are not here to die, Daniel. You are here to understand. You have studied storms your whole life, but you have never seen the storm of the human heart. Behind him, the ocean began to move. A gigantic shape rose from the water, swirling like a living spiral. It was Melissa, but not as the radar showed her. She was a being of energy and consciousness, made of light and shadow intertwined. I heard the roar of her winds, but it was also a song, an ancient call that seemed to come from the deep of the earth. Jesus looked at her and said, Every storm you see in the physical world arises from a spiritual root. Every wind is the cry of disoriented souls. Every wave the weight of sins that rise up and ask for redemption. It seemed impossible for me to comprehend. I, the man of science, the analyst of chaos, was now listening to the Creator explain to me that storms were the language of human pain. Then is it our fault? I asked with a broken voice. Jesus turned towards me and answered, Not fault. Consequence. When love withdraws, creation groans. The sea is alive, Daniel, and it reflects the state of the world's collective soul. What man sows in his spirit, the sea gives back. I looked closer and saw that two distinct currents flowed in the waters around Melissa. One golden, warm, bright like forgiveness. The other black, cold, viscous like resentment and fear. They intertwined in a silent duel, rising toward the sky. Jesus motioned for me to observe. These, he said, are the prayers and the sins that humanity pours out every day. They do not remain invisible, Daniel. They become real forces. Some build peace, others generate storms. It is not nature that rebels. It is the heart of man that loses harmony with me. My gaze followed those currents, and I noticed that every time a heart prayed sincerely, a small golden glimmer ascended and calmed the waves. But when hatred or fear spread, the water became dark and boiled like lava. Jesus approached and placed a hand on my shoulder. Do you understand now, Daniel? The world is not destroyed by the winds, but by indifference. The true storm arises when man forgets where the light comes from. In that instant, a gentle pain shot through me. The memory of Evelyn, of all the faces I had lost, of all the storms I had measured without listening to them. I understood that until now I had studied the wind, but not the breath of God that gives it life. Jesus looked at me again, and his gaze seemed to say, The time for understanding has begun. And as the vortex of Melissa grew before us like a living sign, I felt that I was no longer an observer of nature, but a witness to the divine manifesting through it. Before me, the storm was no longer a collection of winds and clouds. It was a living creature, a cosmic breath that wove together the destiny of men. Jesus raised his hand, and immediately the vortex slowed, as if obeying his will. The clouds parted, and beneath us appeared the American coast, immense, suspended in time. It was not a map. It was as if the whole world had become transparent, revealing the pulsating veins of cities, the hearts of people, their fears and desires. Every house, every street, every soul shone or darkened depending on what it carried within. I was breathless. It was like looking at the nervous system of an entire nation, a spiritual organism balanced between light and darkness. Jesus spoke with a deep yet gentle voice. This is not just wind, Daniel. It is a mirror of the heart of a nation. Every people creates its own spiritual climate, and the earth reflects it. His hand pointed to the spot where the hurricane was about to make landfall, and in that instant I saw not only the houses, but the intentions of the men who lived in them. Some shone like little suns, others emitted a heavy gray mist. You see, Jesus continued, the storm does not choose where to strike by itself. It is drawn to imbalance, like the wind seeking a vacuum. I trembled. But why, Lord? Why do you allow all this? Why the destruction? The words came out with a knot in my throat. It is not destruction, he replied. It is purification. I allow things that have no foundation to be shaken, so that what is built on the rock may remain. And then I saw visions flowed like a river, gilded churches closing their doors to the poor, while priests debated power and money. Wealthy families laughing behind thick glass, while outside the homeless sought shelter under bridges. Politicians signing agreements with smiles, ignoring the suffering of the small, the sick, the forgotten. I saw schools where everything was taught except hope. I saw hospitals that healed the body but not the soul. Everything moved in a convulsive rhythm, as if the whole world had forgotten to breathe with God. Then, amidst that darkness, points of light appeared. Small houses, often poor, where families huddled together in prayer while the wind raged outside. I saw elderly people kneeling before a candle, mothers blessing their children, men sharing bread with those who had nothing. Jesus smiled. Do you see, Daniel? In every storm, there are points of light where evil cannot enter. Faith creates boundaries that even the wind cannot cross. When a heart believes, its home becomes a rock, and the ocean cannot overwhelm it. His words infused themselves into me like a gentle fire. I looked at the coast again and saw that those luminous houses scattered like stars in the night were holding back part of the hurricane's fury. It was as if their prayer bent the laws of the wind, transforming it into a song. Then faith truly changes reality, I said in a broken voice. Jesus gazed at me and replied, faith is the reality. It is the only climate that can transform the universe. I understood that the true meteorology was spiritual. Satellites, maps, and models were not enough. What governs storms is not atmospheric pressure, but the pressure of human hearts. And when the heart of a nation is burdened with pride, lies, and fear, the sky responds with shrieks of wind to awaken the sleepers. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, men believe they control the weather, but the weather responds to their spirit. I do not send storms to punish, but to call back. When the earth groans, it is because love has become rare. I turned towards the sea. Hurricane Melissa was still there, but now I saw her differently. She was no longer a monster, but a messenger, a sign that God was still speaking to a world that would not listen. And in the clamor of that wind, for the first time, I felt not fear, but reverence. I was still standing next to Jesus, suspended in that dimension that obeyed neither time nor space. The vortex of Melissa, which had initially seemed like a single heart of wind, now expanded to encompass entire cities. I was no longer looking at geographic maps or satellite images, but at a spiritual landscape, alive, pulsating. Beneath us stretched American coasts and metropolises like the veins of a single body. New Orleans, Savannah, Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa. But they were no longer cities made of concrete and lights. Each had a soul, and that soul was now reacting to the storm's presence. Some shone like flames in the dark, others sank into dense, cold shadows, as if they had been extinguished from within. Jesus stood silently beside me. No words were needed. His gaze was enough to understand that I was about to witness what few humans have ever been able to contemplate. With a simple gesture from him, the cities drew closer, and I found myself flying over New Orleans. The water was already rising, but it was not just water. It was memory. It was ancient pain returning to ask for healing. I saw men and women crying out for help, but also others kneeling, praying, sharing the little they had. And in the midst of that chaos, in some homes shone a light that did not come from electricity, but from the heart. Jesus looked at me and said, when everything shakes, what remains is what believes. He then led me over Savannah. From above, I saw gilded churches and rain-soaked streets, but inside those walls, the spectacle was different. In some churches, priests prayed with the faithful. In others, they discussed donations and power, indifferent to the sirens wailing outside. Every gesture, every word seemed to etch itself onto the city's color. Where love reigned, the sky became clear as glass. Where pride dominated, the light faded. I felt a knot in my throat. Lord, I whispered, where are you when people suffer like this? When they lose everything? When they call you and hear no answer? Jesus gazed at me with a calm that pierced every storm. I am in the weeping of those who lose, Daniel. In the gesture of those who help, in the hand that reaches out, in the silence of those who pray even without words. I am in the pain itself that transforms, because nothing that passes through love is ever lost. As he spoke, I saw scenes of mercy, a young man risking his life to save an unknown child, an elderly woman offering refuge to a family of strangers, a priest stripping off his own clothes to cover an injured person. Every action created a glow that expanded and calmed the fury of the waves. Then, Jesus led me further south, over Miami, and there the vision changed. The city lights, viewed from the sky, were brilliant, but not with divine light. It was an artificial glow, an excitement that smelled of fear and distraction. I heard the noise of music. I saw parties continuing despite the alarm. Many were laughing, dancing, trying to ignore the imminent threat. But beneath those floors, the foundations of the houses were literally corrupt. I saw under the cement hands that had stolen, lied, compromised justice for profit, and in an instant, when the water broke through, everything that was hidden came to light. Jesus told me, "No storm is accidental. Every pain is an appeal. Man fears the loss of things, but he does not understand that often I allow his securities to break, because only then can the heart return to beating in truth." His words fell like drops of water that purified my soul. I understood that what was preparing was not just meteorological, but spiritual. A collective call for the conversion of America. A cry asking to return to God before it was too late. And in the midst of that panorama of destruction and rebirth, I saw something I will never forget. A group of children kneeling on a deserted beach, reciting the Our Father together, while the sky turned red and the sea rose. Jesus looked at them with eyes full of love and said, "These are the true pillars of the world. As long as there are those who pray like this, the ocean will not prevail." YT. Then I understood that I was not witnessing a judgment, but a revelation. The cities were mirrors of souls, and every soul, bright or dark, contributed to the spiritual climate of the planet. The hurricane was not a punishment, but a voice seeking to awaken those who were still sleeping. And as the vision dissolved into a shower of light, I felt my fear slowly transform into compassion, and my science, once cold, begin to kneel before the mystery. I don't know how much time had passed. In that dimension, the word time no longer had meaning, yet within me I felt that something I had kept buried for years was maturing, like a cry that had never found its voice. And when Jesus looked at me again, with those eyes that no human language can describe, everything inside me gave way. It was as if the pain I had always held back was finally knocking to get out. "Lord," I whispered, and my voice trembled like a broken string. "Why did you let my wife die? Why didn't you stop that wave? Why didn't you listen to me when I screamed your name that night?" I was no longer seeking an explanation. I was only seeking meaning. For 14 years, I had lived with the void that no theory, no weather forecast, no graph had managed to fill. All my science was born from a wound. I had believed that understanding storms would prevent me from reliving that loss, but now I understood that I had only built a fragile dam around the pain. Jesus did not interrupt me. He let the words come out, raw, true, full of anger and love together. Then he approached, and his hand lightly touched my shoulder. That touch went through me like a current of warm light. And in an instant, the landscape around us changed. There were no more clouds, no ocean. Before me appeared a scene I knew all too well. My house, the wind howling, the sky folding like a sheet, and her, Evelyn. I saw her as she was that day. She was trying to save some objects, her face wet with rain, her hair disheveled, her eyes full of determination. Then the water came, the sudden fury, the deafening roar. I saw myself running toward her, my hand outstretched, our last look. But something was different. This time, there was no terror in her eyes. There was peace, a peace I had never noticed, blinded by panic. Jesus spoke softly, his voice full of a tenderness that tore through every defense. "She did not die, Daniel. She returned home before you. She was taken from you not to punish you, but to make you seek me, not the waves." Those words struck me like a forgotten truth. I felt my heart open, and for the first time in years, I truly wept. Not the cold tears of anger, but the warm tears of surrender. I saw them fall into the sea beneath us, and as they touched the water, they became pearls of light, sinking slowly like seeds. Jesus leaned down, and with a fatherly gesture, gathered them in the palm of his hand. "Every tear that does not turn into resentment," he said, "transforms into prayer. And every prayer born of pain is a living stone in the kingdom of heaven." I couldn't speak. All I could do was look at those pearls and feel that each one contained years of silence, of questions, of nights spent in front of the ocean, waiting for an answer that never came. And now I understood. The answer had always been there, in my own pain, which God had transformed into an instrument of redemption. Jesus looked at me again, and his gaze was no longer just compassion. It was a mission. You were saved because you still have a message to give, he told me. You passed through the storm to remind the world that nothing is lost if it has been loved in me. Even what the water takes away, I safeguard it. And whoever has believed in love never dies. Those words resonated within me like waves that no longer crash, but caress the shore. My whole life, all my pain, all my work suddenly found a direction. I had not lost Evelyn. I had simply been preceded by her into eternity. And as the sea around us calmed and a ray of light pierced the clouds, I understood that the biggest hurricane was not the one I had seen on earth, but the one that had been raging within me for years, and that now, finally, it was ceasing to blow. The light around me intensified, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Jesus looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw reflected not just the ocean, but the entire earth, alive, pulsating, suffering. I want to show you what your human eyes have never been able to see, he said. Not the storm that comes from the sea, but the one that has already risen in hearts. In an instant, the sky opened like a wound, and before me appeared superimposed images, like pages of a book turned by the wind. Cities trembling, fires devouring forests, towers collapsing like sand, men fleeing without knowing from what. Every scene had a sound, an odor, a vibration. It was not a disaster movie. It was the revelation of the spiritual reality hidden behind the world's news. Jesus spread his arms, and everything I saw began to revolve around him, like a solar system of events. Every system that man has built without God, he said, will be shaken. Not because I want to destroy, but because everything that does not rest on the truth cannot last. His words carried the weight of eternity. I saw corrupt politics, where men and women signed agreements in the shadows, pretending to serve the people but bowing only to power. I saw arrogant science, which had transformed knowledge into pride, convinced of being able to manipulate life itself, as if the creator were just an ancient hypothesis. I saw a lukewarm faith reduced to soulless rituals, churches full of words and empty of spirit, hearts praying out of habit, not out of love. Each image crashed inside me like waves on a cliff. I felt the weight of the truth, yet I couldn't look away. Lord, I stammered, but then, is there no hope? The world seems so lost, so far from you. Jesus gazed at me, and in his look I saw a tenderness that made me tremble. There is hope, Daniel, and it is greater than the evil you see. He paused, then added, and you will carry it. After the storm, the greatest spiritual awakening of your time will be born. But first, the truth will have to pass through the fire. And as he said, fire, I saw a column of spiritual flames pass through the earth. It did not burn the flesh, but the illusions. Every lie, every false security, every human pride was consumed. I saw the rich weep for the loss of their treasures, the powerful kneel, believers rediscover the faith they had forgotten. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Not destruction, but purification. And I understood that what was about to arrive was not an end, but a new beginning. Then Jesus showed me Melissa again, the gigantic hurricane swirling like a divine eye over the seas. This, he said, is only the first of the 3 great signs that prepare the world for renewal. The sea, the earth, and the sky will speak, and those who have ears will understand. But many will laugh, others will be frightened, few will truly convert. Yet, through these events, I am calling humanity back to its first love, myself. I remained silent as the visions continued. An earthquake ripping through a metropolis, a global economic collapse bringing nations to their knees, a sudden war sparking fear and division. But among the ruins, I also saw people helping each other, prayers rising amidst the smoke, and small churches filling up again, not with religion, but with presence. Jesus smiled, like one who watches the seed of spring emerge from the ashes of winter. Daniel, he finally said, every storm has 2 voices, that of fear and that of grace. Man will choose which one to listen to. I allowed you to see so that you may tell, and so that those who hear your words may not fear, but prepare. The wind of judgment is not the end, it is the beginning of the awakening. At that moment, I understood that my whole life had led to this, not to study storms to predict them, but to pass through them to understand what they reveal. And as the vision receded like a tide, I felt the truth burning and healing me at the same time in my heart. No science will save the world, but a single act of sincere love can change the destiny of an entire nation. I did not know if I was still dreaming, or if I was experiencing something more real than life itself. The light surrounding us softened, and before me, the hurricane dissolved like mist vanishing at dawn. In its place, I saw the earth after the storm. The cities that had known the fury of the wind now breathed a sacred silence, dense with gratitude and awe. Jesus was beside me, and with a wave of his hand, he invited me to look closer. "You see, Daniel," he said, "the trial is not the end, but the womb in which faith is born." Then I saw things that no camera could have captured. Hospitals, once full of screams and despair, were now places of inexplicable miracles. Doctors who had lost all hope saw the sick awaken without explanation. The wounded healed in a matter of hours. People who had been trapped under the rubble were found alive, serene, with a smile and a prayer on their lips. A surgeon, trembling, dropped his gloves and whispered, "It wasn't my hands." Someone was guiding them. Jesus looked at me and said, "Grace descends into the wounds. Where man surrenders, my kingdom begins." Churches, many reduced to ruins, began to live again. Some no longer had a roof or walls, yet they were crowded with people. There were no golden altars or majestic hymns, but simple, trembling voices uniting in a single supplication. I saw priests kneeling in the dust, confessing their own faults publicly, and people embracing them, weeping. In that moment, I understood that the true temple is not built with stone, but with broken hearts that choose to forgive. We walked among the ruins of a coastal city. The sea had swallowed entire neighborhoods, but now, on the wet beaches, children were praying, holding hands. No one had instructed them, yet words that seemed as ancient as the world came out of their mouths. "Father, thank you for letting us live." Their innocence was proof that heaven had not abandoned the earth. Jesus smiled, and his face lit up like the rising sun. He also showed me scenes I never would have imagined. Politicians kneeling, publicly asking forgiveness for the lies told, for the power idolized. Scientists confessing that they no longer had certainties, but wanted to seek God in the mysteries of creation. Journalists reporting not only the news, but the conversions, the wonders, the tears of those who had found faith again. The world was changing, not because the wind had swept away houses, but because pain had opened hearts. Yet, within so much light, there was also the shadow of human freedom. Daniel, that is myself, asked hesitantly, "Lord, will everyone convert? Will everyone understand?" Jesus lowered his gaze, and in his eyes I read infinite compassion. "Not everyone, Daniel. Some will open up and become lighthouses in the world, but others, frightened or proud, will harden their hearts even more. It is the mystery of freedom. I can knock, but not compel. Love never forces, it calls and waits." Then he led me to an immense beach, where the sea stretched out calm and shimmering. Hundreds of people were kneeling on the still wet sand, their hands raised to the sky, their voices joined in a song I knew well. Amazing Grace. It was a chorus of redeemed souls, and when the sun pierced the last clouds, its light was reflected on the tears of the survivors, turning them into gold. Jesus whispered beside me, "This is the fruit of tears, not of winds." Storms serve to remind that grace is the only force that can rebuild what man has lost. At that moment, I felt something within me that I hadn't felt in 14 years. Peace. I looked at the same sea that had snatched Evelyn from me, and for the first time, I was not afraid. I no longer saw it as an enemy, but as a door. I understood that God had not wanted my loss, but had made it a bridge toward himself. And as the sun rose high and people continued to sing, I felt my heart, once hard and analytical, beat to the rhythm of mercy. The sea was silent, but in that silence was the sound of a promise. Life can be reborn even after the most violent wind if God remains at its center. I did not know if time had stopped or if we were beyond time itself, but I felt that something inside me was about to change forever. Jesus was looking at me, and in his gaze was a sweetness that no word can describe, but also a strength that pierced every hesitation. His face was light and stillness together, like a sun that does not burn but heals, Around us, the sea was calm, yet every drop seemed to breathe the presence of God. I understood that this was the end of the vision and the beginning of a task. Daniel, Jesus said, speaking my name as only the one who created you can, you must return. Those words pierced me like silent lightning. Return? To what? To the body? To the pain? To the world I had left suspended between science and solitude? I looked at him, confused, almost frightened. Return, Lord? But why? Here there is peace. Here there is no more storm. Jesus took a step towards me, and his presence was like an ocean that envelops you without submerging you. Because there, he said, pointing to the earth stretched out beneath us, there are still sleeping hearts, and you will be their call. He led me close to the edge of that dimension, where the light mixed with the sky like golden mist, and from there I saw the devastated coasts, the collapsed houses, the tears, the prayers, the rebirth. Everything was intertwined like threads of a single fabric, pain and hope, loss and forgiveness. You will tell them, Jesus continued, that Hurricane Melissa is not a curse, but a calling. That every storm, whether of the sky or the heart, is a letter written from heaven to awaken souls. I do not send wind to destroy, but to awaken. I do not send water to punish, but to purify. Remember this, Daniel, what shakes, saves. I lowered my gaze, my hands were trembling. I felt small, inadequate, a man who had spent his life studying the sky without ever truly listening to it. Me. But who will listen to me? I asked in a faint voice. I am just an old scientist, a broken man who is afraid of the sea. Jesus smiled, and that smile was enough to dissolve every fear. He who has ears to hear will understand, he replied. Titles are not needed, truth is. The world does not need experts, but witnesses. And you are one. Your wounds will be your evidence, your voice will be my echo. Then he held out his hand to me. On the palm, a small drop of water sparkled like a liquid diamond. Within it were reflections of light, colors that do not exist on earth, and a warmth that penetrated to the soul. This, he said, is your renewed faith. You will no longer lose it. Carry it with you, and the wind will no longer frighten you. The drop lifted as if suspended in the air, then merged with my chest, and I felt a flame ignite within, alive but gentle, like a heart finally starting to beat with the same rhythm as heaven. Around us, the light began to change. The waves dissolved, the sky became fainter, and the face of Jesus began to fade like a dawn, blending into day. Lord, I cried, trying to grasp him with my gaze, don't leave me. I still have so many questions, but his voice remained clear as an echo on the sea. I am not leaving you, Daniel. I precede you. I am in the wind, in the weeping, in the faith I have given you. When you speak, you will not be alone. Then everything dissolved. The sea, the light, the distant singing of amazing grace. Only a warm white glow remained, enveloping me like a mantle. I felt myself fall, but without fear. It was as if my soul was being escorted back home, but to another home, that of the body. The world began to reappear slowly, the sound of a monitor, the smell of disinfectant, a voice calling my name. And before opening my eyes, I heard that sentence etched in my heart one last time. Every storm is a message, Daniel. You are my messenger for those who want to listen. I couldn't say if it was an instant or an eternity. Everything around me, the light, the sea, the face of Jesus, began to dissolve like sand carried away by the wind. Only his voice remained, distant yet alive, penetrating every fiber of my soul. Time is not just time, Daniel. It is my voice. Prepare them. That phrase resonated like a promise or perhaps a command, and immediately afterward I heard something unmistakable. A beat. Slow, deep, real. My heart. A pressure grew in my chest, increasing as if the soul were forcefully re-entering the body. Then the weight arrived. The body, the matter, the flesh I had forgotten. A mild pain, but full of life, shot through me like a shock. Air returned to my lungs with a gasp, and along with it, the sound of the world. Distant sirens, a constant hum, and intermittent beeping. I opened my eyes sharply. Before me, the ceiling of my study, the flashing lights of the screens, the radar reflection tracking Melissa, now only a few miles from the coast. I was stretched out on the floor, cold from the metal and plastic. My body was sweaty, but I felt no fear, only a deep silence within, a silence that spoke more than 1,000 voices. I tried to move my fingers, then my lips. I felt like I was being reborn into a world I knew, but which I now saw with new eyes. Every sound, every light, every breath had a spiritual meaning. The ticking of the clock seemed like a song, the wind whistling outside a prayer. I heard the door open, agitated voices, hurried footsteps. "Daniel! My God, he's alive!" One of my colleagues shouted, leaning over me. His hands touched my pulse, my forehead, his eyes wide with disbelief. I looked at him and in a hoarse but firm voice whispered, "It's not just a storm, it's a calling." The man stared at me without understanding, but it didn't matter. Those words weren't just for him. They were for everyone, for all of humanity that was still sleeping before the sound of the sea. They helped me up with difficulty, trying to understand what had happened. They said they had heard a thud, that my heart had perhaps stopped for a few minutes, that they had to take me to the hospital. But I knew. I hadn't simply had a medical emergency. I had crossed a threshold. I had seen the other shore, and now I was returning with a message engraved in my heart. I turned toward the screens. Melissa was still swirling, imposing, but in her movements I now recognized a language. No longer destruction, but revelation. Every curve of the vortex was like a word written from heaven. It was not the end. It was the beginning of something that man had not yet understood. And as my colleagues rushed to update the data, I stared at the ocean through the window. The wind beat against the glass, and in that sound, there was no longer terror but a summons. I closed my eyes for an instant, and I saw Jesus' hand again, the drop of light, the transfigured sea. I felt that gift, the renewed faith, still burned within me. I was no longer the Daniel who searched for answers in numbers. I was a witness, one who had touched the boundary between the visible and the eternal. I got up slowly, supported by those around me. The room seemed to vibrate with a new energy. I looked towards the sky, past the clouds, and smiled. For the first time in 14 years, I felt no fear of the sea, but gratitude for life. There was no longer anger, nor void, nor guilt. Only a silent certainty that rooted itself within me. Everything I had lost, everything I had suffered, had served to bring me to that moment. It was then that I understood. My mission was not to predict storms, but to prepare hearts to recognize the voice hidden within them. Every hurricane, every earthquake, every pain is a call from heaven. And I, a survivor between science and faith, had been chosen to tell it. The sea roared outside, but peace reigned within me. I looked at the horizon line and said to myself almost in prayer, "Lord, now I know." I haven't returned to explain the storms. I've returned to listen to them. And with those words, my real life began. This message is deeply personal to me. Knowing you stayed with me until the end truly touches my heart. Please write Amen below, so I'll know you were part of this moment and can thank you myself. If this story moved you, share it with your loved ones. On WhatsApp, Facebook, or wherever hearts can still be reached. Because maybe Jesus wants to speak through you today. And don't forget to subscribe to Heaven's Gate so together we can keep awakening souls to his light.